Welcome to Mr. Giant Reacts. A ting, a ting, a ting. I'm Mr. Giant, and today we're going to be watching why driving in Europe is better than America. Why? I guess we're going to learn about that, you know what I mean? I want to see what this is all about. We're going to learn that here, okay? Let's YouTube and simmer and see what this is all about. Woo!
I love driving, and I especially love driving in Europe. I've been living in Europe for about 2 years now, originally from Orlando, Florida. I've lived in Amsterdam for about 2 years now. Amsterdam isn't exactly a car place, but I've always been a car person, and I've always loved driving. What I like about living in Europe is that European drivers are excellent, especially compared to American drivers. I was inspired for this video after watching a video by Tedward, which I'll link in the description below. In his video, he was explaining why Americans don't use a 3-lane highway correctly. And it got me thinking how much I appreciate driving in Europe. European drivers are some of the best I've seen, and I think some of the best in the world. And I'm hoping to explain why I believe so in this video.
All right, let's
I
hear
haven't
it.
done any research. This is just my experience, so if I'm wrong about anything, please correct me in the comments. This is just my perspective, having lived in Europe for 2 years, having driven mostly around Western European countries, such as Netherlands, Switzerland, France, Germany, UK, and in the US, I primarily have driven in Florida. So Florida's not exactly known for the best drivers, especially we get a lot of tourists who don't know how to drive in
I don't know where they're
the
going.
US, and a lot of elderly folks, and just people who don't know the right rules of the road. So that's my benchmark, that's what I'm comparing against. One of the main reasons I think European drivers are better is just driving in general is a privilege. So if you look at most European places, most European cities, you don't need a car. You don't need to drive anywhere. Public transportation is well established. You can use a train, a metro, a tram to get pretty much anywhere you need to go. You can use public transportation to get pretty much anywhere, so you don't really need to drive. Only if you live in more suburban parts of Europe, but even then public transportation is still available.
You know where he says that public transportation there is so much more better than here. Where I live, a bus goes by every hour. So if you have to go to work for like 7, you got to catch the 6 o'clock bus. So I go to work early in the morning. So I have to get up like at 5 a.m. and catch like a 6 o'clock bus or 6. Actually, it's a 5:45 or 6:45. That's how the buses run here in order to get to work. Because if I don't, I'll be late. And if you so miss that bus, you're gonna be an hour late. There's no other alternatives, you know. I mean, I could walk to work, but I'm still going to be late because it's about 12 blocks to walk, you know what I mean? But yeah, and I've lived in other places like in New York. Public transportation is really good there. You know, you could use the train, you could use the bus, you could get a taxi, or they have like these people who have their own personal cars. When I was there, not Uber and Lyft and those type of things, just an ordinary guy, and he said $3, I'll take you where you're going. You know what I mean? So getting transported in places like New York, especially, was quite easy. I lived in Kentucky, Lexington. Not so much, man. You barely see a bus go by. You know, I don't think I ever saw a taxi once when I was living in Lexington. And let's see, where else have I lived? Nashville. I don't even remember seeing a bus in Nashville. I lived there for like a year. You know what I mean? Of course, I live on the outskirts of it, but you know, very rare you see a bus go by. You know what I mean? And like I said, here, oh lordy lord, you missed that bus, or a bus is late, and you're trying to get to work. You're incognito, people. You know, it's really hard to get around. It's really hard to get around here. And forget the taxis here, man. You call a taxi here, the taxi takes like an hour, sometimes 2 to get to you. And when you call them and tell them, hey, you need a taxi here, they don't pick up the phone. You can't order a taxi here. You know what I mean? Let's get back to the video. That's one right thing he's saying, especially for where I live. Public transportation, not the best.
So Europeans don't have to drive. They want to drive. And because they want to drive, they put more effort into it. On top of that, getting a driver's license in most European countries is a much more involved and expensive process. For example, in the Netherlands, getting a driver's license can cost a couple thousand euros because you have to do mandatory driving lessons. On top of that, the age to get a driver's license is much older than most states in the US. So I believe in the Netherlands you can start learning to drive around 16 and a half years old. That's when you do your theory test and then you start doing driving lessons. You don't have a full driver's license without restrictions until you're 18 years old. Compared to Florida, where I'm from, you start driving at 15, you do your theory test and you start driving at 15, and you only have to have a learner's permit for 1 year, and there's no mandatory driving lessons. Your parents can teach you how to drive. On top of that, the cost in general for driving is much lower. The cost of getting a driver's license is much lower in the US. And driving is kind of a necessity in a lot of parts of the United States, except for major metropolitan cities.
Yep.
You have to drive. So getting a driver's license is less of a privilege in the US and more of a necessity. So that distinction alone, I think, contributes to a lot of the differences that I'm going to point out. So getting a driver's license is a much more involved process, especially in countries like the Netherlands. In Germany, it also requires mandatory lessons. It costs a lot of money. So when they invest that much into getting a driver's license, they don't want to lose it. They learn to drive properly. They learn the right rules of the road. They don't want to do anything to jeopardize that, and they drive accordingly. You can see here in this example, I'm just outside of Amsterdam. There's nobody cruising in the left lane. I'm driving at 5:30 in the afternoon right now. Nobody is cruising in the left lane. The left lane is only for passing. You can see how people use the lanes. They're very well disciplined. And that's a common theme. They're well-disciplined drivers. This goes back to how they learn to drive. They have to take mandatory lessons. Their parents aren't teaching them to drive. Their parents aren't passing on bad habits about driving. They're learning the proper rules of the road. They're executing them while they learn to drive. So even though you take a theory test in the US on what the rules of the road are, you don't really remember that. You remember what you learned while you were learning to drive. And oftentimes that's from what your parents taught you. And that's not the case in Europe. You'll see here the highway just widened up and people immediately start moving to the right. Not everybody, but most people do. Nobody's fighting, nobody's rushing. They're just following the rules. They're well disciplined. Don't get me wrong, not everybody follows every rule. You can see there are some more aggressive drivers sometimes, but it's not the norm. And even the more aggressive ones tend to get on their way, get out of the way. They're not messing with anybody. They're not pissing anybody off. There's no real road rage. So discipline is one of those key important attributes. The next thing is the roads in general. The roads are well maintained. I'm going off of what I've seen in the Netherlands and Germany. Not every European country has the same privilege. I've seen some pretty poor roads in countries like Belgium. And even I've heard in Italy, roads aren't as nice. But you can see here the highway is well maintained. There are no potholes. It's quite wide. And people use the lanes correctly. So even though there's a lot of lanes, it allows for a lot of capacity because people actually follow the rules of the road. They stay to the right, they only pass on the left, they pass and then they get back over, and that's the general way it works here. So when they add more lanes, when the highway is wider, it allows for much more free-flowing traffic, a lot more capacity, a lot more cars. Unlike places like Houston where they added lanes, nobody follows proper rules there, so they continue to sit in the left lane, even if it's 16 lanes wide, and it doesn't help the traffic situation at all. In this area, this is a speed-controlled area, so it's actually controlled by average speed cameras. I'll deep dive into that in a separate video, but the Netherlands has some of the strictest speed laws in Europe. Talking about the rules of the road, when you look at truckers, they also follow the rules very strictly in Europe. They're almost always all the way to the right. They rarely are passing. There are zones where they're not allowed to pass. They're rarely in the left lane. They're rarely passing. When they do pass, they get back over to the right lane immediately. There's less clogging of traffic. So discipline, learning the rules of the road, following them, these are important themes. The process to get a driver's license is much more involved, much more strict. Another thing with driving in Europe, in my opinion, the cars are much more solid, they're much more roadworthy. You have vehicle inspections, so people can't drive old, beat-up cars. You have to have your vehicle inspected ever so often. Depending on the age of the vehicle, it's either once a year or once every few years. There's rules about what the vehicle can or can't have equipped on it. It has to pass inspection for you to keep driving it on the road. So the roadworthiness of vehicles is also better. And some states have this. Florida in particular doesn't have this. So you see people driving on the highway with rickety vehicles that are falling apart.
Oopties.
They've gotten into an accident and they haven't fixed the vehicle. It's a road hazard, in my opinion. That doesn't happen here. People maintain their cars well in the first place. They have to maintain them well because to keep driving them on the road, they have to pass the inspections. Germany has some of the strictest inspection laws. You can see many videos on YouTube about passing the TÜV inspection. I haven't had to go through this personally in the Netherlands, but I do know that inspections are required. I haven't seen any poorly maintained vehicles on the road. And because of this, because of the discipline, because of the roadworthiness of the vehicles, generally Europe has higher speed limits. The Netherlands used to have a national speed limit on the highway of 130 kilometers per hour, which equates to 81 miles per hour. People used to drive faster than that. Recently, as of March of 2020, there's a national speed limit of 100 kilometers an hour until 7 p.m. Some roads are still 100 kilometers per hour in general. I'll do a separate deep dive into that in another video about the Netherlands. But in general, countries like Germany or France, the highest speed limit you'll see on suburban highways is 130 kilometers an hour. And people drive faster than that. You can easily drive 140 kilometers an hour without any issue. And again, if everybody follows these rules of the road, driving that fast, even on narrow highways, isn't an issue. You can also see in the Autobahn, people driving much faster than that. It's a 2-lane highway, yet there's very little accidents. And that goes back to the discipline of following the rules of the road. People keep to the right, even if somebody is driving faster than you, it's completely safe. I'll have to do another video about the Autobahn because that's a whole experience in and of itself.
I heard about that.
I truly love and appreciate the Autobahn, and I wish that America had that privilege, but honestly, the drivers don't deserve it. Another reason driving in Europe is so much better, again, going back to the discipline, you'll see this as a common theme. There's very little distracted driving. People are focused on driving while they're driving. They're not on their phones, they're not eating, they're not really drinking coffee, they're not reading a book. They're not doing all of these crazy things you see people
putting on makeup
do while they drive. They're focused on driving. And they have to be focused on driving. You're not allowed to be using your phone. You're not allowed to be eating while you're driving. You're not allowed to be doing anything but driving while you're driving. In fact, in the Netherlands, they started rolling out a system where there are cameras over the highways that will look at cars and take pictures. If you're caught driving while you're on your phone or doing something while you're distracted while you're driving, they'll actually mail you a ticket.
Oh, wow.
So they're very strict about enforcing no distracted driving, and people follow it. People focus on driving. And when you focus on driving and you have drivers that are focused on driving, you can have much more freedom and much more driving enjoyment. So distracted driving isn't really a thing here, and it's really well enforced. I think that...
Can you imagine if they institute a strict rule to where those cameras are doing it and they click, click, you're eating? Oh, really? You're going to get a ticket in the mail. Boy, people will be up. It's my right to eat when I'm driving, you know. It's my right to put on my makeup when I'm driving, you know. It's my right to watch TikTok videos when I'm driving. Yeah, man, people would go up in arms, yeah, you know. They're stripping away our rights bit by bit. They're watching us. Oh, Big Brother is watching us. Oh, yeah. They'd go crazy here if they tried to do that. I could just see people, you know, just doing crazy stuff, you know, driving by them and looking up and then going to court and bringing up stuff from the Constitution that says it's an infringement on their right and their freedom and their liberties and things like that. I don't think that would work here, man. There'd be people going in arms up in that bad boy. But let's get back to the video. I'm just going by what I see people go up in arms here for.
That helps contribute to some of the driving characteristics of some of the roads. People are much more focused. So there aren't really distractions while you're driving. You're focused on driving, you're paying attention, and this is part of the reason why there are some things you really need to pay attention to while you're driving in Europe. Things like roundabouts, things like speed humps, things like pedestrian zones, bicycle lanes, trams, buses, horses that are allowed to be in traffic, a lot of different things that you need to pay attention to, and that's why you really need to pay attention while you're driving. And Europeans do in general. Now, as an American driving in Europe, I am guilty of carrying over some of my bad habits about distracted driving. But when I need to pay attention, I pay attention. And I've always thought of that in the US as well. I pay attention while I'm driving, I focus on driving, I get pleasure out of that. And that's the norm here in Europe. You drive when you're driving. You're not doing anything else. It's not a time when you're, catching up on emails or reading a book or eating your lunch. You can see here, this is one of these roads that's almost one car width wide. It shares a bicycle lane, and this is a bi-directional road. You really have to pay attention here. You have to mind the space. If a car's coming in the other direction, you have to squeeze to the right and make sure there's enough space. But when the road is empty like this, you can enjoy it. One difference with Europe, generally people don't use cars to commute. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of people that do commute to work by car in Europe and European cities, but in general, cost of parking is very expensive. Fuel is very expensive. People don't use a car to commute if they don't have to. So people will often defer to public transportation to get to work. So people aren't driving regularly as much as they do in the US. So usually when they're driving, it's for pleasure, not so much necessity.
Oh.
Of course, it's maybe necessity to go somewhere, but they're focused on driving while they're doing it. It's not part of their morning commute. And this is generally speaking, this is my take. It's not scientific, of course. I like that I can choose to drive when I want to drive. I can enjoy driving. I'm lucky that I live in Amsterdam. I don't have to commute. I don't have to commute by car. Another thing I've noticed is when people are towing something or carrying cargo, it's well secured, it's covered with a net, things don't fly out of trucks, things don't fly out of trailers. People, when they're towing something or when they're carrying something or hauling something, they're staying to the right, they're driving in the slower lane, they're not passing anybody, they're not driving erratically. I remember regularly seeing in Florida landscaping trucks with trailers with things that are just bouncing around, flying around, things that could fly off of the trailer in any second, and those guys were driving 80-something miles an hour in the passing lane, passing cars, driving erratically. That just doesn't happen here. When you consider some of the points that I've mentioned, driving in Europe is overall safer. If people follow the rules, it makes for a safer experience for cars, for pedestrians, for cyclists. It also makes for a better driving experience as a driver. And that's why I love driving in Europe. After a long road trip, I don't feel exhausted. I don't feel like I was dealing with a lot of bad drivers. I don't feel like I was dealing with a lot of people sitting in the left lane. I don't feel that fatigue that you feel when you drive in America. I actually feel quite relaxed while I drive. And it's because there's similar people like me driving, people who want to drive, people who enjoy driving, people who pay attention while they're driving. So I feel like I'm sharing the road with a lot of like-minded individuals. I also feel like driving in Europe, I've become a better driver. I've learned things that I didn't learn in America. Roundabouts, for example, dealing with cyclists regularly. Like I said, this is my personal experience. It's definitely not fact. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Thanks.
Okay, man, that was quite interesting thing, you know what I mean? Even I had to get used to driving in America, though I haven't driven a whole lot in America. But, just being a passenger sometimes is kind of, confusing because we drive on the right-hand side of the road, in the Caribbean, or is it the left? It's the left, sorry. See? I'm confused here. We go down on the... Oh gosh, I gotta think. That's why I don't drive much, because I'll find myself driving on the wrong side of the road. Big accident and stuff. You know what I mean? The speed bumps, we call them sleeping police. The roundabouts could be quite confusing because sometimes they change the flow of traffic there, and on the island that is, and it shouldn't be confusing. Not like the European roundabouts because those are huge. You know, cars are just coming from every which direction and stuff like that. But now I know, I believe they have some street lights and they have a speed limit. I do believe. When I was there was no speed limits. There's no public transportation. You know what I mean? It's just these little mini vans that people own that they call buses, and it's privately owned. And you spend how much money? I don't know how much it is now. Back then it was like 25 cents, 50 cents, and they take you to wherever to go. Of course, I live on an island, so you could pretty much walk to anywhere you go. Because I used to walk home from school, and halfway from the school to where I live, you walk the rest of the way on the beach. So who needs a bus? You know what I mean? Of course, if you're working, you probably want to get home and chill. And if you're going to school or work in the morning, you gotta get this, so you gotta use them little minivans and thing that they call minibus. You know what I mean? But anyway, man, that was quite interesting there. I hope you guys are having a great day so far, and you all take care of each other. All right. Link in the description, by the way. Link in the description, and also link another video on Europe that I have reacted to. You all can go check that out too. All right. Take care of each other. Cool runnings.